For 30 years, one name stayed silent. She stood beside Joan Rivers through the death, the firing, the funerals, and the jokes that shocked a nation. She saw the woman the cameras never showed. Now, decades after Joan died, that assistant has finally spoken. And what she says about the NDA she signed has stopped people cold. Not because it's cruel, but because it's not what anyone expected. Everyone assumed there was a dark secret buried behind that contract. There was a secret. It just wasn't the one people were waiting for. This is the truth Joan protected for years. The last girl in Larchmont. She was born Joan Alexandra Malinsky on June 8, 1933, in Brooklyn. Her family later moved to Larchmont in Westchester County. They were comfortable, Jewish, suburban, and respectable. Her father was a doctor. From the outside, everything looked proper and safe. That safe world gave Joan something to push against for the rest of her life. She later called herself the last girl in Larchmont. In her version of the story, she was the girl nobody asked out, the plain one, the one her mother worried about. That feeling stayed with her, and later, she turned it into fuel. She went to Connecticut College, then Barnard, where she earned her bachelor's degree. A young woman from her background was expected to choose a steady path, marriage, respectability, a life that made sense to everyone watching. Joan chose comedy instead. In the late 1950s, she walked into comedy clubs in Greenwich Village. The rooms were small, the money was poor, the future was unclear. Her family thought she was throwing her life away. The group around her would later become legendary. George Carlin was there, Woody Allen was there, Richard Pryor was there. Joan was the only woman. At 22, she married James Sanger. The marriage was annulled that same year in 1955. Years later, she would turn that story into material too, because almost everything that hurt her eventually became something she could say on stage. For most of the next decade, nothing happened. She worked in small clubs for small money, using a stage name partly so her parents would not have to explain what she was doing. Club owners told her women were not funny. They did not always say it with cruelty. They said it with certainty, as though it was a rule of the business. Most clubs booked one woman at most. Some booked none. Every time Joan stepped on stage, she was trying to win a place in a world that had not made room for her. By the time her career finally moved, she was already over 30. In comedy, that was dangerous. For women, it was almost fatal. She had spent her 20s failing in public, walking into rooms that did not want her, and leaving with almost nothing. Then, in 1965, she got booked on The Tonight Show. February the 17th, 1965. That night changed her life because Johnny Carson was watching. Joan Rivers did her set. At the end of it, Carson told her on air that she was going to be a star. She spent the rest of her life describing that moment as the most important 30 seconds of her career. She was right. In 1965, no machine in American entertainment had more power than The Tonight Show. One appearance could change a career. One sentence from Carson could open every door in the country. For Joan, it did. Carson gave her more than praise. He hired her as a writer. He brought her back again and again. Over time, he turned her from a promising comic into a trusted part of his world. By 1983, he made her the permanent guest host. That meant she sat in his chair whenever he was away. In comedy, that chair was power. For anyone who was not Johnny Carson, it was the strongest position in late-night television. Joan knew what he had done for her. She dedicated her 1986 memoir, Enter Talking to Him. For 20 years, Carson was her champion, mentor, and protector. His support shaped her career more than any other professional relationship in her life. Then, Fox came to see her. $10 million and a phone call. She did not make in 1986. Barry Diller was trying to build a fourth American television network from the ground up. Fox needed attention. It needed noise. It needed a show that could make people notice the network existed. Diller offered Joan Rivers $10 million and her own late-night show. The offer was historic. It would make her the first woman in American history to host a network late-night program. It would also place her directly against The Tonight Show. Fox added one more thing that mattered deeply to her. The network agreed to hire her husband, Edgar Rosenberg, as executive producer. That made the offer harder to refuse. The talks were kept secret. Joan decided she would tell Carson once the deal was official. That choice followed her for the rest of her life. Again and again, she said she regretted it. Her explanation was that Fox had demanded secrecy and that her contract left her trapped. Her critics felt that after 20 years, Carson deserved a phone call no matter what the contract said. Joan often admitted they had a point. That is one of the most striking parts of the whole story. When she looked back on the disaster, she did not act as though she had handled everything perfectly. Across decades of interviews, she said she had made a terrible mistake. Dick Cavett, who knew both of them, gave one of the fairest judgments. He believed Carson did not need to become that angry, and he also believed Joan's side handled the situation badly. Other Tonight Show regulars had started competing shows before. Carson had blessed them. Joan seems to have believed he would treat her the same way. He did not. Carson found out before she properly reached him. The relationship ended at once. Johnny Carson never spoke to Joan Rivers again. He did not speak to her in 1986. He did not respond in 1991, after his son Rick died in a car crash and Joan sent him a condolence note. He did not speak to her when he retired in 1992. He died on January 23, 2005, and the silence remained. 19 years passed without one conversation. The break also became professional. The Tonight Show made it clear that celebrities who appeared on Joan's program could be banned from Carson's show. Local stations refused to carry her. Her new show reached far fewer stations than his. Joan had been given the biggest job of her life. The man who helped give her a career now made that job almost impossible. The Late Show starring Joan Rivers premiered on October 9, 1986. Elton John opened the show in person with The Bitch Is Back. It was a bold beginning. The trouble arrived quickly. By March 1987, the show was already being called a flop. Then Fox turned on Edgar Rosenberg. The network removed him from the day-to-day running of the show. After that, Fox ordered Joan to fire him completely. She refused. On May 15, 1987, Joan and Edgar were both fired. The show had lasted 7 months. At first, the network tried to soften the news in public. The line was that Joan had not truly been fired and would simply host less often. That was the public version. The truth was simpler. She was fired. A few days later, she gave a reporter 4 brutal words about what Fox had done to her. "They raped me." In her 1991 memoir, Still Talking, the tone was quieter and sadder. She wrote that she still could not believe it had happened. She described the feeling of losing everything while still hoping the person who hurt her would come back and apologize. Her final broadcast came on a Friday in May. The guests included Howie Mandel, Chris Rock, and Paul Rubens as Pee Wee Herman. Joan smiled through it. 3 months later, Edgar was dead. August 14, 1987. Edgar Rosenberg had married Joan Rivers in 1965. He had produced her. He had managed her. He had built much of his own identity around her career. In 1984, he suffered a heart attack. After that, he became clinically depressed. Joan believed the medication he was given after the heart attack had played a role in his depression. In August 1987, only months after Fox fired them both, Edgar checked into a hotel in Philadelphia and took an overdose of prescription drugs. he was 52. Their daughter Melissa was 19. Joan later said, more than once, that she thought about ending her own life after Edgar died. According to her, the thing that stopped her was her dog. It jumped into her lap at the moment she was sitting with a gun, and the thought that came to her was simple: who would take care of the dog? That was the story she chose to tell the public about the closest moment she ever came to dying by her own hand. What happened next explains Joan Rivers better than almost anything else. She went back on stage. Then she made jokes about it. She did not wait for decades. She did not save it for a careful interview years later. She put the death, the funeral, Melissa's grief, and her own grief into her act. Some audiences did not know how to react. Some hated it. Joan kept doing it. Her reason stayed the same over the years. Humor was how she survived. Once she could laugh at something, it could no longer fully destroy her. That became more than a coping method. It became her armor. It also became her business strategy. After she had said the darkest thing herself, there was almost nothing left for anyone else to expose. In 1987, that was shocking. Suicide was rarely discussed in public. Families hid it. Obituaries softened it. People whispered around widows instead of speaking directly to them. America did not have an open language for that kind of loss, and comedy about it was almost unthinkable. Joan Rivers stood before paying audiences at 54 years old and spoke about her husband's overdose only months after it happened. She said the word out loud when many people still could not. The response was not always kind. She kept going. Melissa Rivers later wrote and spoke about that period from inside the family. She was 19, grieving her father, while her mother was taking their private pain onto the stage. For a time, mother and daughter became estranged. Then, they repaired the relationship. Eventually, they made television together for 20 years. That pain became part of the public story too, because in Joan Rivers's world, almost nothing stayed hidden forever. $37 million in debt. After the funeral, Joan Rivers did not get a quiet ending. Her show was gone. NBC had blacklisted her. The husband who had handled the money was dead. Then the full weight of what he left behind came into view. The debt was $37 million. That number would be crushing for anyone. For Joan, it landed in 1987, when she was 54 years old, newly widowed, freshly fired on national television, and shut out from the most important stage in her business. Work did not come back quickly. For almost 2 years, steady offers were hard to find. The woman who had once sat beside Johnny Carson as a regular guest host could barely get booked where it mattered. Television had turned cold. The industry had stepped away from her. The bills, though, stayed right where they were. Then, on September 29, 1990, Joan Rivers walked into a place many stars feared: QVC. At that time, a shopping channel did not look like a comeback. For many entertainers, it looked like the place a career went when the doors had already closed. Joan later put it in her own sharp way. In those days, only dead celebrities went on QVC. Then she gave the real reason. Her career was over. She had bills to pay. That was Joan Rivers. Other people would have dressed the moment up. A star launching a jewelry line might have spoken about a lifelong love of design, a secret creative dream, and a passion that had finally found a home. Joan told the truth. She needed money. That habit followed her through 6 decades in public. She kept taking the flattering version of her life and stripping it down to the part most people would hide. That is why embarrassment had so little power over her. By the time anyone reached for the painful detail, Joan had usually said it first, on stage, with a punchline waiting behind it: $1 billion in costume jewelry. The Joan Rivers Classics collection began with a 3-hour premiere. Joan built it with her friend David Dangle, and she treated it with real seriousness. This was no lazy celebrity side project. New collections came every season. The line moved from jewelry into clothing, beauty products, and fragrance. Over 24 years, it grew into more than 6,000 different products. One scarf alone showed the scale. In 2012, the lavish luxury sequin scarf sold more than 88,000 units in one day. During the final year of her life, Joan moved 1.2 million individual products through QVC. By the time she died, the total sales had passed $1 billion. $1 billion in merchandise. All of it built by a woman who had gone on a shopping channel because she was broke, blacklisted, and unwanted by the people who used to call her. The most important part was how she sold. Joan did not stand there looking ashamed. She treated QVC like a live room. She joked with the hosts. She teased the products. She teased herself for selling them. 3 hours of retail television became another stage, and she knew exactly how to win the room. Her audience understood her because she spoke to them directly. Many were women at home. They did not want fake glamour or careful celebrity smiles. They wanted someone funny, fast, honest, and alive. Joan gave them that. Then she sold them earrings. The line continues on QVC today, still run by David Dangle, more than 10 years after her death. The earrings and necklaces remain part of the site. Now, place the two numbers beside each other. In 1987, Joan Rivers was $37 million in debt. By 2014, her QVC sales had passed $1 billion. The second half of her life was built in a space the industry looked down on. She was in her late 50s. Her television standing had collapsed. The old doors were closed. Joan found another door, opened it herself, and turned the room behind it into an empire. The rest of her career kept moving too. In 1989, she launched a daytime syndicated talk show. In 1990, that show won her a Daytime Emmy. She beat Phil Donahue and Oprah Winfrey in the same category, only 2 years after becoming one of the most publicly humiliated people in American television. Then another act began. In 1994, Joan and Melissa started covering the red carpet for E! Before Joan, the arrivals outside an awards show were mostly empty time. Stars walked in, cameras flashed, and the show waited to begin. Joan changed that space. She turned the question of what someone was wearing into an industry. From there came Fashion Police, and she was still hosting it in the last year of her life. Her own view of the pattern was simple. Good times came. Bad times came. None of it lasted forever. She had lived through that cycle several times, so she kept moving. That was the rhythm of her survival. The documentary Where She Cried by 2010, Joan was 76 years old. That year, she allowed 2 filmmakers, Ricky Stern and Ann Sundberg, to follow her for 12 months. The result was Joan Rivers, A Piece of Work, which premiered at Sundance on January 25, 2010. The film is unusually raw because Joan let the cameras go where most performers would never allow them. The opening lingers on extreme close views of her face without makeup. The documentary shows her staring at an empty calendar, the private fear of almost every aging entertainer. Joan speaks openly about the terror of blank pages. Work meant life to her. Silence meant danger. A scene in Wisconsin shows a man heckling her after a joke about deafness. His child was deaf. Joan answers by speaking about her own deaf mother. Then she keeps going. The moment is uncomfortable, revealing, and very Joan. The film also shows the plastic surgery she never denied and often joked about. It shows the huge card file where she kept decades of jokes, all written on paper and arranged by subject. Drawer after drawer, card after card, joke after joke. No computer system carried the weight for her. No assistant quietly maintained it in the background. Joan kept the archive herself. That card file matters. It may be the least funny object connected to one of the funniest performers of her generation. A wall of drawers, index cards, subjects, lines, setups, punchlines. It showed the side of comedy that audiences rarely see. Joan understood the act as a craft, and craft needed stock. Every joke was inventory. Every performance drew from years of labor. The documentary made $2.9 million at the box office. It also introduced Joan to many younger viewers who knew the name but had never understood the work behind it. More than that, the film made future tell all stories feel pointless. Joan had already placed so much of herself on screen. The fear, the vanity, the hunger for work, the surgery, the pressure, the loneliness. She gave the audience the private version before anyone else could package it. Her books followed the same rule. Joan wrote 12 of them, including Diary of a Mad Diva in 2014. That book came with a disclaimer because she roasted more than 100 living celebrities inside it. Her rule about targets was direct. She made jokes about very famous people because the audience had to know them for the joke to land. That was her standard. Her aim went toward power, fame, wealth, and people already standing in the spotlight. A piece of work also captured something even more revealing than the fame. At 76, Joan was still taking almost every job: corporate events, casinos, small clubs, rooms in places most people would never recognize. She had earned tens of millions, yet she still traveled to perform for 200 people because she never trusted the phone to keep ringing. The empty calendar in that film was real. It belonged to a woman who had been broke at 54 and had made a private promise to herself. She would never let the floor disappear beneath her twice. Everything she told you herself. Now gather what Joan Rivers chose to reveal about herself. Her husband's suicide. Her own near-suicide afterward. The dog that stopped her. The $37 million debt. The blacklist. The firing. Her role in the fight that helped trigger the fallout. The surgery. The collapse of her professional standing at 54. By the time anyone tried to expose Joan Rivers had usually finished the job herself. In 2012, when she was 79, she spoke casually on The Howard Stern Show about a one-night stand with actor Robert Mitchum. The clip still travels online because people remain stunned by how plainly she said it. That openness makes the silence around other subjects even more meaningful. Joan spoke freely about herself. She stayed careful with the private lives of other people, her staff, her family's personal business, her long relationship with Orrin Lehman, which lasted from 1993 to 2001, Melissa's private life, her grandson Cooper. That balance explains why people stayed close to her. Joan made herself public. She protected others. A tell-all needs a hidden gap to sell. The value comes from the distance between the public image and the private person. That kind of book works when someone has carefully polished a public mask. A wholesome star, a beloved television father, a famous figure who built a brand on goodness. Joan left almost no gap. The public already knew the woman with the debt, the dead husband, the surgery, the humiliation, and the hunger to keep working. She said those things herself, often for money, often on television, often with the timing of a professional who knew exactly when to twist pain into laughter. An assistant approaching a publisher would face one obvious question. What can be revealed that Joan did not already reveal first? no one has ever produced a convincing answer. Sabrina Lott Miller and Jocelyn Pickett appear in the credits of Joan's documentaries and specials. They worked for her for years. Pickett is credited on Joan Rivers' Do Not Start With Me in 2012 and on A Piece of Work in 2010. Miller appears on A Piece of Work and on Joan and Melissa, live at the Academy Awards from 2005. These were long-term employees. Joan trusted them. She kept them close. She even placed them in her will. The dog's Joan Rivers died on September 4, 2014, at the age of 81. A week earlier, on August 28th, she had suffered cardiac arrest during an endoscopy and laryngoscopy at a Manhattan clinic. Her will and trust documents had been signed on November 16, 2011. The estate was reported to be around $150 million. Melissa was named an executor and received Joan's tangible property, including a $35 million apartment on the Upper East Side and a house in Connecticut. Her grandson, Cooper, her niece, Caroline Waxler, and her nephew, Andrew Waxler, were provided for through a blind trust. Joan also left money to causes she cared about. One was God's Love We Deliver, the New York charity that brings meals to people who cannot leave their homes. Joan had competed for that charity on Celebrity Apprentice in 2009 and won. She was 75 years old at the time. Other gifts went to Guide Dogs for the Blind in California, the Jewish Guild for the Blind in Manhattan, the Jewish Home and Hospital Federation of Manhattan, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. Then came another detail. Joan left a portion of her earnings to her publicist and to her two assistants. Sabrina Lott Miller and Jocelyn Pickett also received the dogs. All four of them, all rescues. That is the final documented instruction Joan Rivers left regarding the two women the internet now claims were preparing to expose her. She trusted them with living things she loved. One more piece of the story closes the loop with Johnny Carson. On February 17, 2014, 6 months before her death, Joan Rivers walked onto The Tonight Show for a cameo on Jimmy Fallon's first episode. It was the same NBC studio where she had made her first appearance 49 years earlier. For 26 years, she had been kept away from that stage through Carson, Leno, and O'Brien. Carson had already been dead for 9 years. Joan was 80 years old. She went back anyway. When Carson died in 2005, a reporter asked her for a comment. This was the man who had cut her off, ignored her condolence note after his own son died, and refused to speak to her for 19 years. Joan called him the best straight man in the business. That detail says more than any scandal could. The online claim about her assistants also has real human damage behind it. Sabrina Lott Miller and Jocelyn Pickett are living private people. A video saying one of them broke a confidentiality agreement to expose Joan Rivers points suspicion at a real person. It suggests betrayal without proof. It does this to someone without a public platform, without a publicity machine, and without an easy way to answer. The record says something simpler. They were the two people trusted with Joan's dogs. That is the documented truth, and it is a stronger character reference than most people ever receive. Joan Rivers spent 50 years saying the worst things about herself before anyone else could. She paid the people who knew the rest. She remained generous in public about the man who hurt her career more than anyone. There was never a great secret waiting behind an NDA. There was a woman from Larchmont who made sure she would never be at anyone's mercy again. She did it by taking every weapon people could have used against her, placing it in front of an audience, turning it into a laugh, and charging admission.